Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this Walt ID webinar. We're going to be talking about self-sovereign identity and specifically the enablers to the market. There's going to be different layers of technologies, different parts of the SSI stack, and I'm really delighted to bring this panel together to dig into kind of what's stopping the SSI market taking off and what are the enablers we need to accelerate things. So I'm Jamie Smith. I'm the founder at Customer Futures. And I've got a fantastic panel here joining me. We've got Oliver Rosales, who's a technical director across digital identity and SSI, working on architecture, diff and W3C, ISO, IETF, and those kind of bodies. We've got Kim Hamilton, who's a co-founder at Digital Self Labs, and she is helping companies empower people with self-managed data in all sorts of different ways. We have Otto Mora from Polygon ID. He's leading business development in the Americas. And if you don't know Polygon, the ID network is one of the leading layer 2 kind of scale up networks on Ethereum and doing some really exciting work around zero knowledge proofs and zero knowledge identity. We've got Sharon Liu from Jobs to the Future. That's a not-for-profit in the US, helping US adults find jobs. And in their labs unit, working on all things wallets and interoperable learner records and that kind of thing. And of course, we've got Dom, the CEO of Walt ID, an open source SSI wallet. It's phenomenal because it speaks multiple different protocols and languages, and it's one of the leading open source wallets out there. So let's jump in. Today, there are so many conversations about self-sovereign identity. It's really growing as a trend. It's growing in the analyst reports. The conversation has been largely technical to this point. And people say, well, why hasn't it happened? What are the things that are going to make the market accelerate? And so today we're going to dig into exactly those enablers. And we're going to talk a bit about the self-sovereign identity stack, the different layers, the wallets, the agents, the blockchain, if that's required, right all the way up to the UI and the application layer. And so first I want to start at the technical level. And Oliver, who better place to be able to talk about interop and standards and specifications? And maybe you could start us off by talking about some of the missing technical pieces around standards and specs. And if we have those pieces in place, what's the pathway? What's the upgrade path from today to that future?
Yeah, there's a lot of standards being defined in a lot of different organizations. So in my view, solving wallet invocation and wallet selection is definitely one of the biggest technical pain points at the moment. I could not attend the last IAW, the Internet Identity Workshop, but I heard that it was again a topic, a lot of sessions, a lot of interest from multiple different stakeholders. And currently, so today, it's not really possible to do wallet invocation, wallet selection without compromising user experience. If the assumption is that the user can have multiple wallets installed on the same mobile device. Many people have tried in the past, but without the browser and platform vendors, it is impossible to find a satisfying solution for the end user in my mind. We could see finally some pre-standard work in the W3C incubator community group, which is a community group, not a standards working group, where platform vendors and browser vendors, they proposed a new API to request digital credentials, or more specifically, ISO MDocs from a wallet, an SSI wallet in that case, or just a digital credential wallet. And so although this goes beyond wallet invocation and selection, might be still an included feature. One obvious issue with that effort is that it targets only the API between the browser and the web application, and not the API between the browser and the mobile platform, or the API between the mobile platform and the mobile wallet. So this means that wallet vendors might end up implementing different approaches for different platforms. It could also mean that it might not be impossible at all for third-party vendors to provide such wallets. But however, recent conversations and discussions with platform vendors and browser vendors were very positive and promising. So I believe we will still see a future where we have multiple third-party wallets being possible on mobile devices and users. So besides wallet invocation and selection, there's still also some ongoing work how to profile existing digital credential issuance and presentation protocols to work specifically in high assurance environments. For example, the high assurance interoperability profile is currently being defined by this under the same umbrella as the OpenID for verifiable credential specifications. Um, Besides that, I personally feel that there's also some work needed on a simple BBS-based credential format. So for example, combining JSON web proofs with BBS, but without proper mobile platform crypto support. If you don't have native platform APIs, BBS Plus doesn't really add a lot of value for high assurance use cases because private keys can easily be copied from one device to another. And so I think there is definitely an upgrade path. So we have privacy preserving technologies. We have something that is called SD charts, also is on a standard track in IETF, which works with hardware crypto on mobile devices, on current consumer devices quite well. It has some limitations, but we have an upgrade path for BBS Plus in the future once mobile devices have also like hardware support for generating proofs of that kind. Regarding the wallet invocation, we also have an upgrade path. Currently, we have things like OpenID for verifiable presentation, which is also under the umbrella of the OpenID for verifiable credential specifications. Technically, it should be possible to combine both the browser API that was that I mentioned before and OpenID for VP, if you assume that they would share the same request format. And there's probably also many things I have not mentioned. And that's just a few things.
It really does sound like there are many moving parts, and partly it's about different groups working together on what does interoperability need to be, like what does perfect interop look like versus what is kind of pragmatic interop. Like what do we have today? What could we deploy to actually get real value? And if we can just only deploy that initial piece, then we can see a path to what it could look like. You talked about the BBS Plus, the integration of that later on. Maybe some of those pieces can come soon, but some of them need to come later. How do you think about the impacts, right? If we don't have interoperability immediately, what are the impacts on the market? Or do you think we've got sufficient interoperability already for things to take off?
That was a good question. So in my mind, we really need to have more production use cases. So I think if you don't have production use cases, then interoperability doesn't really matter. That's why I'm really excited about things that are going on in America, with specifically the MDL, Mobile Driver's License Initiative. So there's a lot of interoperability already. So there's a TSA pilot that I think includes 5 different mobile driver's license wallets. So 2 platform vendors and 3 wallets are developed by the states. And it works already. You can use your mobile driver's license at TSA checkpoints at airports. I think about 25 airports, and it works. So we have for specific use cases interoperable solutions already. I think very similar things will happen in Europe with the EIDAS 2.0 regulation.
I think that there's certainly enough early progress in enough kind of marquee use cases to show the way, to point the way. But it does sound like we need to be able to point to real world implementations that people can feel, they can talk about, and it's not just the conference circuit, but actually people seeing it working in real life. And maybe this is a good time to bring in Kim. You've been working on, well, what are those, production use cases that are going to bring this to life? It's all very well having a kind of relatively nerdy, very deep technical conversation about how these things fit together. But how do we think about the value of SSI? Because that's going to drive the requirements for interop, isn't it?
Exactly. And to some extent, we have been focusing on building the base layers, the verifying the credentials, the centralized identifiers, because they're relatively recent in terms of, being published. And I think one aspect that I'm seeing is almost, I would say, too many standards, and some of the driver to success right now has been reducing the proliferation through profiles. And that's one reason I'm very glad we have Sharon on the call to talk about her work with JSS. But building the base layers, I think that a lot of us have talked about the value of it. Saying, oh, SSI can do this and it can do that. And, maybe you're lucky to work in an area where issuers are happy to generate credentials. So we've seen success in the supply side, especially in more educational use. But we're still struggling with demand side, establishing interoperability. And again, part of that is the newness and relative lack of interoperability, which we're proceeding on. But I agree with Oliver that we need more laser focus on real use cases to enable the open standards based ecosystems we envision. And some of those may be, so I think like where I'd like to see progress is certainly on things other than capital like official governmental documents. I think one of the values that many of us had in mind from the beginning was the idea that peer claims or sort of informal claims could be used stacked up to enable, centralized reputation. Now that's a hard problem on its own. Um, but so what are some examples? Public or organizational claims, data that doesn't fall under the tricky sort of mix of personal data and or regulatory concerns. Um, the other two areas or other main area, I guess, would be shaving off a significant area of moderate chunk of onboarding or verification costs that really add up over time. And so to that extent, I think at Money 2020, there was a lot of the term reusable KYC was floating around a lot. And, or maybe it was reusable identity, something reusable. And so I was wondering, oh, is that our new catchphrase or something like that? But, it does really apply to these financial onboarding cases. But so that was good to see, and that's a really good example of something that yes, we're demonstrating this solves a problem, and hopefully um, it can be done in a reusable KYC could be done in many different ways. It could be done in an SSI-based way, or essentially way, or other methods. I certainly hope that someone, one of the vendors in our space, would focus on an area like that.
I think portable identity for opening accounts where they're regulated, whether it's a pension or a bank, is that's where we're seeing the friction. That's where we're seeing organizations spend millions and millions. I think I heard once that banks spend on average in the US 50 million a year dollars on KYC, on identity and KYC, which is staggering. And think about the shared efficiencies if they could share that via an individual. So maybe just came to a quick follow-up question. If you're building a product to solve a real world use case, what are the enablers you think need to be in place, or if there's anything missing right now? If you're going to pinpoint a couple of things, what would you point to?
S- Just in terms of, speaking of characteristics, I definitely think it's just really focusing on the end user and, sort of demand side. It's much less of it can be used to do this. I think because there are so many hurdles and in the technical interop, it's really helpful to sort of simplify and not have to assume too much of the user that your user is going to install this or that, or corporations are going to, have to rework their internal systems to integrate with something. So I think in terms of these not to say that it's not worth continuing to build these more ambitious technical stacks. It's great that those can go along, but in terms of thinking about organizations adopting this, they can only extend themselves so much. Each standard, uh, has a corresponding tool set, has the corresponding, set of security considerations and things that need to be done. And so how much are you asking of implementers? So I think that's one of the key concerns, really laser focusing on, sort of what the minimum profile that you're expecting and something that works well with their existing stack. And by really focusing on the added value, I think that's a really good way these, uh, these approaches rolled out in a responsible way. That you're not either going to leave users in the lurch, just potentially outdated technology, or burning your early vendors. Yeah.
I love that expression, added value, and like finding out where it is that SSI can make a difference. And I hear so often that so many companies are building features and they're not building products. But actually, one of the things that is really important to get around digital identity wallets and credentials is that really they enable ecosystems. They enable data to flow in a new way. And also Polygon ID is, there's a lot of buzzwords around SSI, but I think especially like zero knowledge and stuff, but ecosystems is such an important thing to understand. It's not just a word to use. It's how can data flow in a new way, but how do we move from features to products to actually new ways of building data ecosystems? And how does Polygon ID think about that? And what do you think of the pieces that are missing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we sort of started with this position of we have an existing ecosystem of Web3 dApps that we can tap into. We've got DeFi protocols, we've got DAOs that they're already using the Polygon stack. And so like the natural progression is like, why don't you also add verifiable credentials on top of that to, verify that somebody is a person and validate that they are indeed a resident of where they say they are, and so on, right? So I think that's important, but also like enabling kind of a marketplace, right? So I think that's sort of the issue with some of these identity protocols is that, okay, you download the identity wallet and then what? Like, what can I do with it, right? There's no like credential discovery capabilities. You don't even know which sites accept the credentials, right? So we're working on developing a marketplace that enables that, both from the perspective of the issuer of credentials, the wallet holder, as well as somebody that wants to be a verifier, right? So as a verifier, I can see which all are the issuers that provide, different KYC credentials, proof of personhood type of credentials. As a wallet holder, I can go into the wallet and I can see, okay, what can I do with this credential that I've now just obtained, right? Like, how's that gonna like, make my life better? And so on, right? So I think having a marketplace like that and kind of a complement to the whole identity protocol itself is a very powerful way of kind of solving this cold start problem, which I definitely agree is relevant, right? Like, we're not going to get traction if we don't make this easy for users, for verifiers, for issuers, right? It's got to be easy for them to identify. So I think that's one key step. And then the other thing is just, the technology has to be palatable and easy to use, right? That is important as well. It's like what Kim was saying. It's like, how much are you expecting these folks? How much effort, how much hoops do they have to, run through to be able to get your setup? So we're doing things such as enabling the issuer node to be available on the Google Cloud Marketplace, things of that nature, where I think those are vital steps. But at the end of the day, I have to agree with both Dominic and Kim that use cases drive, you know, the the end discussion. Like, it's fine for people to sit on LinkedIn and argue about Open ID versus EBSI and JSON Web Proofs versus JSON Web Tokens, et cetera, and so on. But we could even argue about Polygon ID and on-creds versus BBS Plus, and we could have those kinds of discussions. But like that, users not going to care about that, right? They're not going to care that you're using one protocol over another. They just want things to be easy to use, right? So think about the VHS versus Betamax days, right? not necessarily the best technology wins the day, right? It's about how many titles you have and how easy it is to use, right? So I think that's the end goal here. Make it easy for the user.
Oh, and Kim made the same point that this has to be digestible for organizations, right? This has to be organizations are going to stretch themselves so far, and being able to say it's a new leading edge technology, but building these ecosystems is going to require things that they can find easier to adopt. And going from new products with a digital wallet, yeah, we got to get the UI right, but they've got to be able to consume these things in a way that doesn't necessarily break their business model day one. We know that these things are going to be quite transformational over time, but the early stages, are going to have to make sense to them. And I love the point you made about discoverability. These are not. This is not a lot of the conversation in SSI. If you ask someone for a credential they don't have, how do they find out where to get it? How do we know that the sources are approved by the places they're going to be used? These are really tough questions, and they speak to interop, they speak to technical standards, but they also speak to the ecosystem and kind of how the ecosystem comes together, not just the technologies. And Sharon, you're right in the heart of that. You're thinking about digital wallets and interoperability at a technical level. But what better use case than helping people find jobs when maybe they have less than perfect documentation, and their university is not just pumping out certs because they've come from the US. So how do you think about digital wallet interoperability, but in the very cold water of having to use this in real life use cases where organizations are going to have to do something different and people are going to have to do something different? How do you think about that?
Are implemented, but by the social impact outcomes. So what we want to see is someone who is facing some kind of barrier. It could be in a lot of cases that these are structural barriers in our society that have to do with racism or discrimination. Sometimes they're administrative. So for example, not being able to get your diploma because you have an unpaid parking ticket. Some of them, though, are in the technology, where in a lot of the research that we've read recently, some of the reviews have showed, for example, that your resume gets kicked out from an applicant tracking system if you don't show a bachelor's degree, right? So you're automatically discounted. And so somewhere in the nexus there, I think that there is some kind of way that technology can enable some of those barriers to be overcome. And actually, that's how I got to know Kim first. She was a little bit my technology Sherpa, where I asked her a lot of these questions, like how do we solve some of these problems? We have, to Kim's point earlier, a lot of credentials. There, according to some surveys, are about 1 million credentials issued by over 60,000 different kinds of credential issues. This is also, job training. This is, Coursera online. This is your university. So what is it that we really need? And I think that we've sort of distilled our problem down to people need vocabulary to say what they can do, what they want to do, what they hope to do, but they don't have the words because some letters live in, a system there, and some other letters live in a system over there. And so what we tend to be interested in is that the wallet can hold all the letters, right, to form the words, but more that the credentials themselves are portable. So that focusing on, okay, so now that we know that the verifiable credentials standard exists with DIDs, okay, what can we do if everyone has a VC? Now, the problem is not everyone's going to want to issue a VC because there are a lot of incumbents in the space. And I'm sure this is true in all of the other sectors where my proprietary platform, my specific special unicorn flavored, credential format is the right vocabulary to use. And I don't want to interoperate. You should just join my network. We hear that a ton. Some of that is because of business interests. A lot of that also is related to regulatory and legal issues related to control and ownership over data, especially for federal programs, data about children who are under 13, who are under 18. And so there needs to be a conversation not only about how do we make it easier for someone to issue a VC? How do we make it easier for someone to hold a VC in a wallet? How do we make it easier for someone to consume and verify it? but also like what are the sort of governance frameworks? What are the legal and regulatory things? And, fundamentally, it's, Jane in an office that needs to do something different in her life that she's been doing for 18 years. So how can we convince her that this makes her job easier? So I don't know if that like answers the question, but I feel like there's an interesting conversation um, that is related to how do we funnel all of the expertise on this call into a way that we can communicate this is actually solving our problems. This will make your life easier. And like maybe it's the challenge of us explaining in English what does SSI mean to someone who's just processing applications or creating databases.
I love that point about it's almost like the understandability is a new word. Like making sense of this is not does it work? I think over the last 5 or 6 years, we've gone through a phase of does it work? Can I trust it? How does the key management work? Those kind of things. Now, organizations are feeling more comfortable that it can be deployed. It's like, yeah, but how? Right? How do we onboard people? What is, not just the last mile of deploying a technology to the customer, but like, what's the first mile? They have to download a thing and do a thing and tap a thing. And, how does that work? And where are they getting their data? And I love this idea about the communications challenge, right? We think of an enablers as technical. And I wonder how much we'd benefit as a group and a community if we had language that was that I suspect will emerge that organizations can kind of hang on to and make sense of this. And maybe Dom, this is a good time to bring you in because you've been at the forefront of this market about engaging different types of organizations, large and small, as a wallet vendor, speaking the different languages, the different protocol types. How do you think about the gaps? Like, what's the next big boulder you think needs to be put in place for us to move the SSI market forward so we can get to these use cases that Sharon's talking about from a worker perspective and from a data portability point of view?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's really at least 5 different key enablers that I see particularly important. And then there's also lots of hard things about them, which I can talk a little bit about. But one set of key enablers is our identity ecosystems and the shared technology that underpins this. So topic that Otto briefly mentioned before and that we talked about in 2 other webinars. So this whole idea of how can we actually make sure that we create an ecosystem where there's a reliable level of trust so that I can really trust the data that's coming from the issuers in that ecosystem and which technology is used. What we're seeing today are the emergence of different types of identity ecosystems, all of which are experimenting with different governance models and ways of monetizing data and sharing data and using different technologies from more decentralized ones like blockchains or layer 2s to more centralized ones like traditional PKIs. So I think identity ecosystems and having a shared set of technology is really a core enabler. And that's also something that we're seeing basically in all the customer projects that are now or soon going to production. This is really a missing link, right? There's different things you could use, different ecosystems, but there's really not one that stands out as the ecosystems that production ready, that scalable, that can really accommodate the needs of different industries or use cases. I think the second key enabler goes back to also, I think maybe the focus that Oliver put on when he was talking about the standardization issues, and a lot of these issues revolve around wallets and how wallets can be used. So wallets are definitely a key enabler of SSI because without wallets, like there's not really somebody to collect and share credentials. So holders in that sense are particularly important, which is why seeing organizations that are providing payment wallets today, that are providing billions of people with payment wallets today, moving into the identity space, working on projects that I think Oliver mentioned before, also in America, in the US, with adopting mobile driver's license, among other things, really shows that the market can flip very quickly because, we have an existing wallet infrastructure, be it fiat payments, be it crypto payments, that we can just extend with identity capabilities and are good to go. The third point is about standards and market acceptance. I think the technological issues that we've been hearing throughout the call are quite clear. It's new technologies, you need to standardize them. You need to make sure that different organizations can work together, especially for production systems. But then also market acceptance is important, right? We heard about zero knowledge proofs and BBS plus. On the other hand, we're seeing SD JOTs being really adopted by regulators right now, or more conservative organizations. So having standards is one thing, but making sure the standards are also adopted by the market are something else. And I'm trying to wrap up here. So fourth is regulations. So we heard the IDIS 2 is coming to Europe. So that will definitely be a massive driver, but there's also other regions in the world, other jurisdictions that are planning regulations, which at the end of the day will potentially unlock valuable data. So there's not just the wallet problem that's being solved, but also the issuance problem, the data source problem. Because if I get, let's say, governmental data, that's already a lot of the data that's really valuable. Being able to prove I'm a human, I'm myself, right? Maybe my financial records, these kinds of things. And also to force adoption. And that really ties into this whole idea of having existing pain points that you just want to solve as a business. We heard about, I think Kim mentioned user onboarding flows in banking financial services. We also talked about education, employment credentials. I mean, it's really about creating a better user experience for people and making sure they can feel more secure and safe and private in all their interactions. And then maybe the last key enabler would be infrastructure. And that's what companies like ours, but also Polygon ID are really building, to making sure that we can, abstract all these different new technologies and standards, and just make sure that at the end of the day, we can go to a world that Sharon mentioned before, where people are talking about the, really concrete problems and not having to worry about the standards, discussions, and and challenges that are happening in the background that all of people like Oliver is battling.
Well, and that's a really nice bridge back to the technology point, right? Because all this is happening at the same time. In many cases, we're building the car as we drive down the road, right? We're trying to roll out these technologies while the standards are settling down. And while these ecosystems are kind of bubbling up, right? There's a kind of, we'll do an MDL thing over here for these use cases, and we'll do an SD JOT thing over here for these use cases. And EIDAS is coming along on the side with 27 countries, kind of trying to build their own standard, architectural framework about how this is going to fit together and what the formats are. So it's a question back to Oliver. Does it matter that they're starting in different places because it'll shake out? Or do you think there needs to be a deliberate path to harmonize these things? And, if so, how do you see that panning out? Because there's different political interests, technical interests, frankly, ego, money, all these things are playing into how the technologies are going to come together. But how do you see kind of alignment of these things over the maybe short or medium term?
There is already alignment between all these different groups. A lot of those groups are siloed, but there are standards or technologies that try to bridge those silos, breaking up those silos. There are certainly other technologies as well, but one example is, for instance, the OpenID for verifiable presentation specification, which, was designed to support multiple different credential formats, which are being proposed by the architecture reference framework in Europe, which is the technical frameworks that will probably be used in the EIDAS Implementing Act, but which allows SD JOTs and ISO MDocs. So fortunately, there are technologies that bridge between technologies, and I think I believe there might be even more credential formats in the future. But I think my point is also to start somewhere and to have a pragmatic approach. Sure, security and privacy is important, but I think we have to be very pragmatic in certain cases, and that also includes, ego and corporate interest. Because I think without deploying those use cases, nobody will win. We need to have we need to decide. We need to start somewhere in order to make this work. And I think I mentioned also in the beginning, we have upgrade paths to more advanced technologies once they are more widely available.
And it does sound like some of the technical choices may have an impact on the features and functions that become possible. Do you have a view on are there technical trade-offs that you think are being made to that would enhance some use cases or make some other use cases harder? I'm thinking of selective disclosure. I'm thinking of some of the privacy capabilities, or even how lightweight the protocol is, because some of them are really or a bit slower and heavier just because they're earlier iterations, and so they're not practical to deploy. Like, how are you thinking about those trade-offs that we might make, and specifically in the context of what that means isn't or is harder to deploy?
No, that's the point. So I believe that um, use case wise, I think it doesn't really make a big difference. I think we already have technologies that work for use cases that are well identified by the IDAS people and by people in America that want to use MDRs for different kinds of things. So I think we have technologies that would work. There's obviously some feedback from civil rights organizations and other security researchers that have valuable feedback. I think we should include them as long as they have useful feedback. And
Can I ask a question though? I guess maybe this is for Oliver or anyone else. Do you ever see a scenario where the implementation of a particular use case goes down a different road for what are the interoperability requirements than another different use case would, and sort of lead to a divergence inadvertently that way?
yeah, I think there's not many issues with that. Actually, I think one of the more popular cases that I saw in practice is if people want to support web wallets versus some people only want to support mobile wallets, like native wallets on mobile devices. I don't think when it comes to credential formats, I don't think any specific use case is not possible with a specific credential format, because yeah, sure, selective disclosure is nice. CKPs are nice, range proofs are nice, but in practice, it can implement all these use cases with very simple cryptographic primitives as well. And the downsides of certain credential formats, it's more like about nuances, and I brought up like security and privacy. So in general, I think you can't really have privacy without security. That's my stance. And I know that there's people who might have a different opinion. But the thing is, sure, if you have, current technologies that don't support selective disclosure or CKPs, then there's a higher chance of relying party or verifier correlation, or issuer relying party correlation, which can not achieve this unlinkability feature, which is a very important feature. In an ideal world, I really want to see that that we have issuer relying party unlinkability, that the issuer doesn't know where the user actually used the data, right? And but to really get to the point where we have a pragmatic stack that would enable that, I think we need to have mobile device manufacturers providing secure hardware that natively runs those proof generations on the devices, which is not, we are not there today, and we don't know when this will happen. So we have to live with what we have, and what we have today is P256 ECDSA on most mobile devices, which is just a lot of limitations. I think it might be a nice challenge in the future to see somebody building a CKP that you prove basically a possession of a P256 private key on a mobile device in serial orbit. But I have not seen an implementation that did that, at least not a very performant one.
Maybe this is a good time to bring in Otto. You're probably the leading edge of what ZKPs can do and how they might be deployed. But maybe you could answer how you're thinking about some of those privacy enhancing techniques, but in the context of what Sharon asked, which is in deploying them, is there a risk, or how do you think about making sure things can still be deployed, in alignment with the other ecosystems that are coming out there? Because the Polygon ID ecosystem won't be the only one. Is this all kind of aligning at the wallet level, and so we can just abstract it away? It doesn't matter what the protocol is, or are there other things you're working on or thinking about that help with alignment between your ZKP technologies and some of the other non-ZKP technologies like MDL?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a natural tendency to, yeah, I think that exactly the wallet would be the key cornerstone of interoperability. And I think there's a lot of truth to that because we see it already in Web3, right? We see Web3 wallets speaking of different blockchains already, right? So, you're going to have NFTs on Solana, and you're going to have NFTs on Ethereum, and NFTs on an L2 on Polygon, and so on. But so the same thing applies for, um, like the wallet, right? Which is the same as sort of like, oh, your video player can play both VHS and Betamax, right? So it's like this multi-format thing, and that's relevant as well. But I think also like the presentation side, at least for us, is relevant. So like we have a proprietary JWZ um, format that is similar to a JSON Web Token, but in the end just does many of the things that JSON Web Proofs do. So that would be an area that would be natural for us to kind of standardize on JWP and making that interoperable, right? And then also reaching out to the DITCOM group a lot more is something that we want to do, right? Because I think DITCOM is very powerful, but we do need to kind of align overall. And we did it in a way that is optimized for ZK proof. So can we feed some of that stuff back into the DITCOM group and then benefit everybody else in the ecosystem out there as well? So yeah, things like that I think are important, where we're not only thinking about the wallet side interoperability, but also like protocol side interoperability. Can you present a Polygon ID credential to a different verifier that only accepts BBS plus, and then how can that be you know um, modeled so that the presentation works into that, right? Being indistinguishably either BBS plus presentation or ZK Snark presentation as we have.
I want to come to Kim on you've been fighting the good fight on interoperability for longer than most. But just before we do that, I want to hear maybe one word from Dominic about the wallet being the point of integration, because that's your jam, right? That's how Walt ID is, being multi-language, multi-layer wallet that can work in those different ecosystems. Maybe just a quick word on how you see interop happening at the wallet layer.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously, we're following the different developments of standards very closely, and we're also very excited about new technologies that are popping up, which is why earlier this year, also, we've had lots of conversations working closer with Polygon ID because we're really excited about this new approach they're bringing to the table, where they want to, or where they're actually, combining off-chain identity approaches like verifiable credentials with on-chain approaches. And we've been doing that also for a while, although without zero knowledge proofs. So we're always excited about this. But yeah, when you're saying wallet provider, wallet infrastructure, at the end of the day, what we're doing is providing for the issuance, the wallet, and the verification side of things, the solutions that are needed. And so what we are really trying to do is to make sure that all these conversations around different standards are actually not really getting to the client in the best case scenario, such as that we can really focus on just talking about the use cases and the applications that organizations want to build. Right. So if we're just supporting different identity ecosystems with their different governance models and onboarding flows and trust registries, if we're supporting different DID methods and credential formats like verifiable credentials, mobile driver's license, and on-chain tokens, if we're supporting different protocols, like basically if we're supporting all these different building blocks that you can possibly piece together to build use cases, then we don't have to talk to our clients about this, but we can actually just really be upfront about the features, the user stories, the user journeys, talk them through, and see what is actually really required. And I think that's very helpful because in many conversations that we've been having, organizations that are trying to get into this space are actually starting from the technology side. So you have people who are not very deep in the technology, but starting to put in requirements like BBS plus signatures. And then you go through the use case and you realize, well, there's not even that big a need of, zero knowledge proofs for that use case. And so taking that right off the table, but just providing something that abstracts everything is, I think, really important also for, achieving a good end goal that's pragmatic, as we've heard before, and it works.
I love that. And I think, it's not the first time pragmatic is going to show up in this conversation, right? There's a short term, what's possible today, and a long term, what we might want to get to, but all these missing pieces need to align. And Kim, I'm going to come back to you then. You have been thinking about wallet interop and credential formats and how that then shows up as enablers or problems in use cases. Because as I saw you nodding along there talking, when Dominic was mentioning, a lot of the technology choices are being made because they're technology choices rather than starting with the outcome and the requirements. And how are you, how are you thinking about the technology choices that are being made today and how it's impacting those real life production deployments?
Yeah, I think one of the key aspects that I've seen over time, gauging how successful or sort of how excruciating the path towards success has been in some sites versus others. Really focusing on focused, testable, layerable, implementable specifications. I think that's really the most important characteristic. I think maybe some of the problems early on had more to do with, SSI or the goals of SSI. It's not just about the sort of the technical standard or implementation or set of principles, or how do you encode that into everything. So I think a lot of our specs early on were trying to make sure to really encode all this possible variation, um, but then that kind of runs counter to the goal of to really get people to implement your stuff. They can't have any ambiguity. And I think, there's just a lot more uh, uh, successful ways to go about this. So I think by doing that, that's your best chance of integrating with existing systems, other standards, and basically making sure that it's not some sort of house of cards that just falls over if any one piece of the technical stack. Um, and I think that's I will name specific examples because a lot of these are just sort of ongoing, and I don't mean to cast down on any one effort because I know the goals of the people involved in all of these efforts. But it's, again, to the point about how much risk is an organization willing to take on at one point. Um, it's really unfortunate if anyone staff has all of these dependencies rolled up into it because that can really threaten the sort of overall goals. Now, to the point about decentralized identity not just being about the tech, about being set principles that go along with it. I do think now, as we are starting to see success, it's more important than ever that we focus on those principles, and enforcing those comes from a variety of things. You know, the mayor, which not really seeing people really, people are really going to pay for a product because it's private by design. We know that by now. We're seeing more progress in terms of legislative action. And so one of those kinds of things that we need to advocate for, there's always a risk that without properly layered either specifications or sort of vendor-led approaches, that these result in closed ecosystems. And so, when you really start to go in depth into how this part or that part works, you realize, okay, this really assumes that it's on some device or some proprietors. And those are the kind of things that we need to continue to poke at and draw attention to it, because those are the kinds of things the big successful technology providers are not going to really offer that up necessarily. You need to find that out. Discrimination and exclusion is key. Like anything that might assume the latest version of a device, that would be, if you're assuming that to use this functionality, someone has, like, I think the latest iPhone, I've heard it costs over 1,000, which seems really high. Assume with people and then needing to ensure resilience. What happens when these, I think, with the on-hair rollout, one thing that's been great is they've been very public about things that could have gone better. And so, even though there were, there were assumptions that, people shouldn't have to assume reliance on the on-hair system parity, sort of hitting issues that come up and maybe like in a certain location, the connection speed isn't as available. People are being, losing access. And so I think there are all of these things that just have to do with what happens when the technology fails and you have a person that, can't get access to the benefits because your technology system failed. All of these aspects are just really important to keep coming back to now that the technology is becoming more successful.
I couldn't agree more. And I think when I talk about how technology in these ecosystems is like maybe 25% of the answer. There are so many other pieces of the puzzle that needs to be put in place. And Sharon, I think, you talked about governance. And really, Kim, what you're describing is what are the rules of participation, but also what happens in the unhappy path. And how do we manage that, not only from a regulatory point of view, but from a user point of view, a support point of view? And I think a lot of these non-technical aspects, rules, models, Kim, you just mentioned principles. Like, how are we designing this ecosystem? And as we bring the Polygon ID ecosystems together, they're going to be based on principles. Like, how are we wanting data to flow? What's the minimum device spec that would be required? It's not saying you have to have a certain type of device, but how do we set the rules and regs for how these ecosystems are going to come together? And so maybe Sharon, when you're thinking about the non-technical components, like what is missing today? What are you saying? If only this piece was in place, then I could make so much more progress, so much faster when you're thinking about, helping people find jobs.
Okay, so it's not just about helping people find jobs. I feel like the non-happy face of a technical failure isn't always the technology. And the image that I always have in my mind, and this is a very American analogy, so I'll explain it. So there's like this groundhog that comes out every year on February 2nd in Pennsylvania. And supposedly, like if the groundhog sees its shadow, it gets scared of its shadow, it runs back into its hole. And we have 6 more weeks of winter, right? And then, but if it stays outside in the sun, it's like spring is here, right? So a groundhog is like a rodent, like a very large rodent. And there's like a party and everyone goes out to look at him. And so I feel like a lot of people are like this. I just spent last week with the National Association of College Registrars and Admissions Officers. So people get very confused, right? They're like, oh, but if we buy this technology, like platform or this suite of services, what does this mean? Do I need a blockchain? And it's almost like frustrating because they're asking all these questions. They're not really the right question because there's an assumption that I think all of us sort of default to, which is like, oh, these SSI principles exist. We can design a technology that solves all of our problems and does all of these things. But I think there's a ton of pre-work that needs to happen, right? So if you have a PDF document and you wrap it in a verifiable credential, what does that mean? It means nothing. But if you have a credential that's digitally native, that has linked open data about the skills and competencies in a language that people can reference, then that's interesting because then you can have tools on your wallet that create a narrative for you. Like say here's a recommendation for the next class you should take or the next job you could pursue, right? So there's a ton of pre-work that needs to happen. But usually what happens though is you have one procurement activity, which to your point, like someone throws in, oh, we need BBS plus. Like, what does that mean? I don't know, but like it's all the rage. So let's just throw it into the RFP and let people build that. But like, then like it comes to you and you're like, great. And it doesn't work and students don't like it or no one uses it and it gets put in the closet. And then it's like, oh, well, we did try your decentralized identifier thing and it didn't really work out for us. So we're just going to move on to, buying a suite of tools on Microsoft again. Sorry, this is not a dig against Microsoft. That was an analogy. And so I feel like we have this danger. Like I think we have just enough of a there where the groundhog, his name is Phil. Phil can come out of his hole because it's the time and he's exploring, but you never know why he sees a shadow. Is it like a real cloud shadow or did he see like a child crying and get like, but it's like correlation and causation. It doesn't even matter. The point is that we have to now wait 6 more weeks if it comes back around for the opportunity again. So that's actually my fear is that a lot of people are really excited, and they should be, about SSI and the potential of digital identities. But the pre-work of like, okay, well, this actually means like in order to successfully implement this technology stack, it means you would have thought about how is your course catalog printed? You would have thought about like, well, how do you describe who a student is? Is a student the person that took one class one semester, took a break, took another class another semester? Is that a student? Do they get 2 identities? Yes, in some cases, right? And so you have to think about all of the things that lead you to the point where you're finally ready for it. But I think we don't help people do that. We just say, oh, yeah, well, here's this VC thing. So go ahead and issue some verifiable credentials and then it's like done. Or like, go ahead and like, get this digital wallet or get like 5 different wallets. It doesn't even matter, right? Because they're all interoperable, right? So, and then like no one uses the wallet and we're like, well, we tried digital wallets, but really people just want like their PDF. And so we're back in the hole again. So I don't know. That was like really gloomy. But I feel like this is maybe something that we can have in our vocabulary a little bit more like in our consciousness.
I think you're making an excellent point because it was kind of buried in my point about the technology being a small part of it. And I think you're pointing out that there's a lot of pre-work, right? Before we get to the requirements, like what is the use case? What is the environment for the user? How do we know not just the spec of the data to issue, but why are we issuing it to the individual in the first place? And what are they going to do with it? Credentials are useless unless you can use them somewhere. And we're going to need to have places to accept these credentials, and we're going to have to know that they can accept them. And so, Oliver, how are you thinking about where this technology is going to show up? Because I know we're deep in the specification of it and the making sure it can be minimally interoperable to be useful. But like, where are you seeing the standards work and the specification work show up? Is it in just the wallet ecosystem? Or are there organizations saying, hey, I need to deploy, I need to start issuing credentials. I've gone through that journey that Sharon described. I'm now ready. What format should I use? How are you seeing those kind of conversations about the choices of technologies that people are making?
Yeah, I think there's there's a lot of issues who, sorry. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of issuers that also like not sure which credential format they should choose. So what then happens typically is they just want to issue the credentials in both formats and then let the stakeholders decide which one they want to consume. That's what we observed in the past. And that's again, because I think as long as the credential formats don't add operational costs to the issuers, they don't really care. I mean, there are obviously operational costs, like, if you have an HSM, hardware security module that has then to sign more operations and you have to scale HSMs, then it gets more expensive. If you have to have a completely new governance process of your read certificates that you're using, that's also like an application that issuers typically don't want, but typically you can design specific credential profiles in all these credential formats in a way that's, it's almost like feature parity between those. I mean, that's what I experienced in the past. So it's possible to issue an ISO MDoc credential side by side with a WSRC verifiable credential, SD job credential, whatnot, using the same PKI infrastructure, and doesn't really add any additional cost to the issuer. So the issuers, they just don't really know. They're very, like what Sharon said earlier, they try to understand the market, and they just don't understand the market well enough to make an informative decision, because we have no clear winner yet. It's like Betamax versus VHS. And at the end, I think production deployments will decide who is going to be the winner of 4.0. To be honest, I think a lot of these credential formats are very similar, and yeah.
So, we're now back to this whole thing of the are we really thinking, or are organizations thinking correctly about why they're issuing credentials, not just what technology they're going to use? And I know, Dominic, you talk about abstracting that the organizations and the users shouldn't have to care. This is about enabling individuals to move data around in a new way. Do you think, from your perspective, the technology is kind of it's there, it's good enough now? Like we should be just opening these conversations with organizations just to get going, start proving the value, and the technology can lag. Actually, we can start with thinking on business problems, organizational problems for real people doing real things that matter in their lives, and the technology it will shake out. How do you think we're ready for that moment, that we can just get on with SSI now?
For sure. And I mean, what else could I say? But going back to the VHS, the VHS analogy from Otto and Oliver, I mean, it says it all, right? Not the best technology necessarily wins; it's the one that's adopted. And then so, I think in many ways, you see more and more production projects popping up. You see more and more large organizations planning very large scale production systems also over the course of the next year. You obviously also have the IDAS coming quite quickly, especially for larger, smaller organizations, which requires them to really just get their hands dirty quickly. And so I believe that for a lot of the use cases, for most use cases, a simple implementation, like we got the technologies and the tools, we just need to make sure that we don't stay in this or let's say that we don't stick in a phase of constant experimentation, and get the things to a point where we can actually have large scale production systems. Maybe it's not the most fancy ones with the most fancy features and shiny ones, but it's the ones that get the job done. And once we're there, I think somebody else also said that before, or actually multiple people, like production is what's driving everything. Production deployments will define, which wallets get a lot of traction, which standards are actually being adopted. Let's just make sure that we get to production quickly. R&D is super important, and new technologies and new standards are very, very important. But let's make sure that we focus on the ones we have for the use cases where they make sense and where there's no clear no-goes, and just, launch production systems and onboard people.
Yeah. So one thing in terms of the, are we ready to go? There's sort of this last mile kind of problem that comes up where organizations, the issuer or relying party, they need that content and structure to be fixed, because, if it's just some kind of, your advertising, here's my skills, this and that, whatever. But in the case of, certainly in the case of reasonable KYC, that, that the verifiable credential is what it is. But that's going to be the target or fixed point against which all these legal agreements are, so bilateral, multilateral agreements between companies, multilateral, that may be something, participation, governance, organization. So that whole schema design, like when we were working on Verity and trying to get the sort of credential schema down to sort of what is the best we can do from a privacy perspective, balance with what organization can accept in that their sort of requirements. So that there's a lot of work in that sort of actually getting that schema right step. I think I don't see a lot of people really focus on Aubrey. And so I think that there are definitely, I agree with Dom, like there's a lot of stuff that's just ready to go. I think that part of getting those credential schemas sort of locked down and really integrated in existing systems, there's a lot of education that needs to happen, first of all, to describe like what's happening, how it's different compared to sort of whatever identity verification mechanism they may be using right now. And so that part's really interesting. And that's just something, throw a bunch of consultants at it or something like that. But it's not to be trivialized for sure. And that's something that it's a lot of effort and will take a lot of revisions. It varies based on the use case.
I gotta say, I do agree with this last addition from Kim. Sorry, I think it's not only like VHS versus Betamax, and here we are with the Laserdisc that's BBS Plus, and here's like CKPs with Polygon ID, like the CD, right? Like like even beyond that, like what does the casing for the movie look like, right? Like what is this format schema for like a KYC credential? Like we realized that in Polygon as well, and we just our conclusion is like let's just create a common schema for identity, working with our issuers. And that's what we agreed to. And then in the end, we'll take this to the diff or we'll take it to some other standards body and get it standardized, but something that's good enough so that folks can begin to issue credentials.
I'm really here. This idea of pragmatism, good enough, community driven, it is going to be the watchword for me. Coming out of this webinar. I think, what do we have today that the technology just works? How can we work with companies and organizations so they're not over-speccing things, but also so that they're doing the hard work up front to know what to ask for? And I think that's such a missing piece. Not does the technology speak to other protocols, right? But like, are you asking for the right things? And are you making sure that you understand exactly what good enough is and have a path to, Oliver brought up early, how do you have a path to what you want in the future versus needing it just now? So maybe we wrap up with one final question to you all, and I think that is, what is like the one enabler that you'd point to and say, this is the big, there are many things that we've talked about in this session, but what's the one thing you want to point to that said we need to have this in place, and then the whole community can move forward and we can start talking about production deployments more easily, and those who are not getting it yet or over specifying things, they'll be able to get it far faster, far more effectively, and move forward. So Dom, I'm going to start with you. What is the one enabler you want to see put in place?
Okay, well, I talked about 5 different ones before, but I'm gonna go for identity ecosystems and the corresponding shared technologies, because if we have functioning identity ecosystems that can support large scale production systems and that come with the governance framework, which typically also includes topics like the one Kim has mentioned, such as the whole schema topics, or how can I trust an issue, right? So if we have identity ecosystems that do this and that are ready for large scale production, I think that would be a very, very good thing to have, to bring customers faster to a point where they can roll out their solutions in the real world.
Brilliant. Kim, I'm going to jump on you. What's your one enabler you want to bring to life?
Well, first of all, just this groundhog thing sounds fake. The more I think about it, like it's true, she's totally right, but I just can't get over it when she describes it that way. So I don't know. Maybe everyone should watch Groundhog Day to just really understand the situation. Um, so with that off my head, so one of the biggest enablers that stands out that would actually be, so easy to do is to address this discoverability problem. And, I think that it's, let's say easy. It's not so that easy, but we need to start trying more ways for it. I think, say registry claims, I think, that we see some things like that sort of fragmented, but I think, it's, and they tend to be more just sort of, you look for something and here's this or that. We can definitely benefit from something that's more opinionated. Again, at the risk of lock-in or sort of, we don't want necessarily the driver to be just some sort of centralized authority, but I think we would benefit from more, sort of proliferation and experimentation around sort of credential and, protocol discovery registry.
Thank you. Oliver, what's your big enabler you want to make sure we bring to life?
Actually, I want to second to what Dominic just said. I think also identity ecosystems is one of the most important ones. Together with governance and trust frameworks, that you can actually know what this credential actually means, or that this credential is actually trustworthy. So fully agree with also like what Kim said. I think it's also very important, obviously.
Thank you. Sharon, what's your big enabler?
Okay, I'm going to say two things. The first thing I'm going to say is that really would be super helpful if we could figure out like how to describe this for the human being. So words like identity ecosystem or wallet invocation only mean something to like 4% of the total population of the world at most. And so if there was a way for us to just say that, then I think that would be like really good for adoption. So that's the first thing. Maybe we can all work on that. So the second thing I'm going to say is that like Pax 20 Phil has a 36% sort of like rate, accurate rate, right? That's his that's his score. He gets 36% of the predictions correct. But like people like going to the party, right? And so it has nothing to do with whether we think like he can predict whether winter will end, because honestly, the app on your phone or on my watch or a lot of places can tell you the weather. So I feel like there needs to be something where we really work with stakeholders who are implementing use case to be like, what is the problem that you are trying to solve? Because I always tell people the technology actually works. And if it doesn't, you then tell the developers, this is what I would like it to do. And, sorry, as a non sort of technology developer, I feel like in my head, this is how it works. Right. So like, you tell your engineer, please build or the spec is a little like weird in this place to like refine these words in the vocabulary or string not array, right? Like these are things that can be figured out. But the thing that can't be figured out is why are you here? Are you here at like 6 a.m. on February 2nd because you don't know what the weather is going to be tomorrow and need to see Bill come out of the hole? Or are you there because it's so fun and it's a tradition, it's a community, you get to drink like cider? And so it's good to acknowledge that all of these things exist, but to really work with people to say, what do you want this technology to do for you? It will do it. And I think that will take us far.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. Otto, what's the big thing that you want to make sure we put in place to make sure SSI ecosystems can happen?
I mean, I'm gonna have to agree with Oliver and Dominic here that the ecosystem itself is 27. Like we just need experimentation, right? And so like to go back to the VHS and MetaMasks metaphor that I love as well, just as much as Sharon loves Phil. Um, I think we need some blockbuster movies, right? I think we need some really big hits. So, like what are gonna be the Terminator style movies or the Back to the Futures that are gonna drive adoption and they're gonna sway people to adopt one standard versus another, right? So like we have some early hits in Polygon ID, like we have HSBC experimenting with us. We have a partnership with Click. We have some DAOs that we're talking to. We have some global banks. So the more we get sort of these, big hits coming out and driving adoption, that's going to, drive selection of technology. And also it feeds into this feedback loop of us learning how to, kind of enhance the identity protocol and make features better, as opposed to going to all of these identity conferences and just building out without, customer input. So I think that's really important. Technology is mature enough already, right? Like, I'll also agree with Sharon here. Like, it doesn't matter whether you pick VHS or Betamax at this point. Like just start making movies.
What a great way to end. So, we heard this is about getting the vocabulary right. It's about doing the hard work before you get to the technology, so we specify it properly. It's about thinking about what level and layer you need the interoperability. Doesn't all need to work perfectly at the ground level, but it also needs some pragmatism. Like, what actually works today? What can we deploy? And then, as Otto's just said, let's be able to talk about this and have marquee use cases. That means we can bring more people on board, bring more organizations on the journey, and make it easy for them to get started. Well, thank you so much to Otto, to Kim, to Oliver, to Dom, and Sharon. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you today. I'm Jamie Smith. I hope to see you all again soon. And thank you to Walt ID for hosting today's webinar.